Japan just detonated the most consequential economic counterattack ever launched against the United States by a close ally. In a coordinated announcement released simultaneously from Tokyo, Nagoya, and Osaka on the morning of April 14th, Toyota Motor Corporation, Honda Motor Company, Sony Group Corporation, and 11 additional Japanese corporate giants formally declared they are suspending all new United States capital investment and accelerating the relocation of manufacturing operations out of American soil, representing a combined $40.3 billion in projected economic activity and an estimated 68,000 American jobs. And this isn't political posturing or negotiating leverage. This is a structured, legal, multi-corporate withdrawal from the United States economy executed with precision by Japan's largest employers, who have collectively operated on American soil for over 4 decades. When the chief executive of Toyota, a company that employs more Americans than any foreign automaker in history, stands before cameras in Toyota City and says the United States is no longer a reliable investment environment, you know the alliance and the economic foundation underpinning it just fractured in ways that cannot be undone by a phone call. Hit that subscribe button right now because you won't want to miss any of the videos I release. So, what triggered this unprecedented corporate exodus? According to multiple senior officials within Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, the catalyst was a classified economic impact assessment delivered to Prime Minister Kishida's cabinet on March 28th. Which concluded that the cumulative effect of the Trump administration's tariff escalation schedule, 34% on Japanese vehicles, 47% on consumer electronics, and 28% on precision manufacturing components, made continued American investment economically irrational for every major Japanese corporate exporter. Sources familiar with the assessment say the document included 3-year financial modeling, manufacturing cost comparisons across 14 countries, and direct testimony from corporate finance chiefs who described the tariff environment as structurally incompatible with profitable operation. This isn't just another trade dispute resolved through diplomatic back-channel negotiations. Constitutional economists at the Brookings Institution are calling this the most serious structural fracture in the post-war economic alliance since the Plaza Accord of 1985. And believe me, when companies that spent billions building American factories, American communities, and American supply chains now describe the United States as an unreliable partner, something catastrophic has collapsed in the relationship between Washington and its most important Pacific ally. Here's the full picture of what's been unfolding. Tensions inside Japan's corporate boardrooms had been building since February 12th, when the Trump administration announced the first tranche of what Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent described as a comprehensive tariff realignment targeting countries running persistent trade surpluses with the United States. Japan's trade surplus with America sat at $68.5 billion in 2023. It was always going to be at the center of that calculation. But everything escalated to a point of no return on March 15th, when the administration announced the second tranche, adding a 34% tariff specifically on Japanese-built passenger vehicles, the single highest targeted tariff applied to any close ally in the post-war era. The emergency cabinet session convened in the Kantei, Japan's executive office building in central Tokyo, lasted 6 hours and 40 minutes. It began at 9 o'clock a.m. local time and did not adjourn until nearly 4 o'clock p.m. According to 3 separate Japanese government officials who spoke to Nikkei News on condition of anonymity, the atmosphere inside that room was described as the most somber gathering of Japanese economic leadership since the 2011 earthquake and tsunami. The ministry's assessment was presented in full. The number was $40.3 billion in total projected investment that could no longer be justified under the new tariff structure. Manufacturing competitiveness analysis showed that shifting final assembly to Mexico, Canada, or Southeast Asia would recover between 61 and 74% of the margin lost to American tariffs. The business case for staying had collapsed. This wasn't about pride or politics. This was about the cold mathematical reality that American factories building Japanese products for American consumers had become more expensive than factories in other countries building those same products and shipping them to America, even with tariffs applied. Smash that like button if this is making sense so far. Here's where it really gets serious. Within 36 hours of the cabinet session concluding, the chief executives of Japan's 5 largest exporters convened a private meeting at the Okura Hotel in Tokyo's Minato district. According to corporate advisors who were present in adjacent rooms during the gathering, the attendees included Toyota President Koji Sato, Honda CEO Toshihiro Mibe, Sony Group Chairman Kenichiro Yoshida, Panasonic Holdings CEO Yuki Kusumi, and Nippon Steel Corporation President Eiji Hashimoto. Also present, according to sources, were the chief financial officers of Mazda, Subaru, Mitsubishi Electric, and Canon. The meeting lasted 4 hours and 20 minutes. What was decided inside, according to 3 people briefed on the outcome, was described by one participant as the most consequential collective business decision made by Japanese industry since the post-war reconstruction period. According to sources who recounted what was said in that room, Toyota President Koji Sato addressed the group plainly. "We have spent 40 years building American trust. We have built American plants, hired American workers, paid American taxes, and absorbed American regulatory costs without complaint because we believed the American market and the American partnership were worth the investment. What we are now being asked to absorb is not a tariff. It is a signal that the rules we built our strategies around no longer apply. We cannot ask our shareholders, our suppliers, or our workers in Japan to absorb $11 billion in annual tariff costs to remain in a market that treats us as adversaries. If we do not act now, we will not be in a position to act at all. History will judge us by what we protect." The room was silent. Honda CEO Toshihiro Mibe, who had personally overseen the expansion of Honda's Ohio manufacturing operations and was known within industry circles as the most America-committed executive in the Japanese auto sector, stood to address the group. According to witnesses who later described the moment to Nikkei reporters, his voice was measured and deliberate. He said, "I have defended investment in America through multiple disputes. I defended it through previous tariff rounds. I defended it to my board, to my finance team, and to my government because I believed American policy would ultimately honor the relationship. I cannot make that argument anymore." What we saw in the March 15th announcement is not a negotiating position. It is a structural reclassification of Japan as a commercial adversary. We are not adversaries, but we cannot continue to absorb the costs of being treated as if we are. The financial case for American manufacturing is gone. According to those present, Mibe's statement ended the last significant internal opposition to coordinated withdrawal. Sony Chairman Kenichiro Yoshida reportedly added, "The investment case is irrefutable on the numbers. Our models are consistent. Vietnam, Mexico, and Malaysia all deliver better margins under the current tariff structure. If we do not move capital now, we breach our fiduciary duty to shareholders. There is no board in Japan that can justify continued American expansion under this framework. Every dollar we invest in the United States under these tariffs is a dollar we are choosing to destroy." Drop a comment right now if you saw this coming. I read every single one. Now things get absolutely explosive. By 6 a.m. Tokyo time on April 14th, the coordinated public announcements had been filed with the Tokyo Stock Exchange, the Japanese Financial Services Agency, and the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission simultaneously. An extraordinary procedural choice, given that the SEC filing made the announcements legally binding disclosures under American law, meaning these were not talking points or threats. They were formal corporate commitments that cannot be walked back without triggering securities liability. The joint statement released by Toyota, Honda, and Sony, filed as a collaborative disclosure with all 3 company seals, read in relevant part. In light of the regulatory and tariff environment implemented by the United States government since February 2025, the undersigned corporations have concluded that the allocation of new capital to United States manufacturing and research facilities is inconsistent with our obligations to shareholders, employees, and the long-term strategic interests of our respective organizations. Each company will begin the process of realigning production capacity to facilities outside the United States on a schedule to be communicated to relevant stakeholders. The supporting financial annexes, publicly filed with the SEC, did not leave room for interpretation. One attachment from Toyota's corporate finance division stated, "On the basis of the March 15, 2025 tariff schedule, Toyota's Georgetown, Kentucky and San Antonio, Texas assembly operations will generate a combined operating loss of approximately $4.2 billion in fiscal year 2026 under current volume assumptions. This loss cannot be recovered through price increases without unacceptable volume reduction. Reallocation to Mexican production capacity recovers $3.1 billion of this loss in the first full operating year." Another attachment from Honda's North American operations detailed, Wire transfers totaling $2.8 billion, previously scheduled for capital expenditure at the Marysville, Ohio facility in fiscal years 2025 and 2026, have been reclassified as reallocation expenditure pending identification of suitable facility expansions in Ontario, Canada, and Celaya, Mexico. This move sent shockwaves through Washington, Wall Street, and the American manufacturing heartland simultaneously. When Japanese companies file legally binding SEC disclosures announcing the end of American investment, using language like inconsistent with shareholder obligations and citing specific dollar losses attributable to named administration tariff decisions, the political and economic calculation has permanently shifted. This isn't the first time American trade policy has strained the relationship with Japan. During the first Trump administration's 2018 tariff actions, Japanese companies absorbed pressure through diplomatic negotiation. The relationship held. Then came the 2019 Section 232 threats on Japanese auto imports. Tokyo pushed back hard through diplomatic channels. The alliance again survived through back-channel compromise. Now it is completely different. This response is not diplomatic. It is corporate, legally binding, and publicly filed under American securities law. The evidence being cited is not disputed testimony or political characterization. It is audited financial modeling. The decision involves 14 companies acting in coordinated fashion with disclosed dollar amounts and specific facility closures. And every major Japanese automotive analyst has confirmed that the cost math leaves no alternative. The pattern is clear. Japan absorbed previous American trade pressure through institutional channels because the relationship and the economic case for America still existed. But when the combined tariff structure makes American manufacturing a $40 billion annual loss compared to alternatives, even the deepest alliance has economic limits that cannot be negotiated away. Subscribe immediately if you haven't yet. This content doesn't exist anywhere else. So what exactly triggered this mass corporate withdrawal? According to senior corporate and government officials on both sides of the Pacific, 3 specific pieces of evidence proved dispositive. First, the manufacturing cost differential under the new tariff schedule. Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry presented corporate leaders with independent third-party financial modeling produced by Deloitte Tohmatsu and McKinsey Japan, showing that under the full March 2025 tariff schedule, the effective cost disadvantage of American manufacturing for Japanese exporters ranges between 18.4% and 26.7%, depending on product category. According to MITI Vice Minister Yoichi Ida, who described the modeling publicly in an April 14th press briefing, the analysis was exhaustive and its conclusions were unanimous. At these tariff levels, American investment is not viable for export-oriented Japanese manufacturers. This is not a political statement. It is arithmetic. Second, the supply chain restructuring analysis showing that alternatives were not just viable but superior. Japan External Trade Organization, JETRO, conducted a parallel study tracking 847 Japanese subcomponent suppliers currently operating in the American Midwest. The study concluded that 73% of those suppliers could be operationally replaced within 18 months through expansion of existing facilities in Mexico, Vietnam, and Malaysia. According to Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura, chief economist at JETRO, who testified before Japan's Upper House Commerce Committee on April 12th, the supply chain dependency on the United States that existed 5 years ago no longer exists. The infrastructure to replace American operations is already built. These companies are not threatening to leave. They have somewhere to go. That is what makes this categorically different from every previous dispute. Here's the absolute kicker. The third piece of evidence is a series of internal White House communications, portions of which were subsequently disclosed in a Wall Street Journal investigative report published April 13th, the day before the corporate announcements, showing that senior administration trade advisors had received and reviewed economic projections in March predicting precisely this corporate response and proceeded with the tariff schedule anyway. According to 3 White House officials who spoke to the Journal on condition of anonymity, a February 27th internal memo from the National Economic Council warned that tariffs above 28% on Japanese vehicles would trigger coordinated investment withdrawal by major Japanese corporations within 60 to 90 days. The memo reportedly concluded with a line that Journal reporters described as chilling. Japanese corporate governance structure means that once the financial case for American operations is formally lost, the withdrawal decision cannot be reversed through political signaling. It requires formal policy reversal at the tariff level. One White House official who reviewed the memo allegedly told advisors, They need American consumers more than we need their factories. They'll adjust. That memo was dated February 27th. The corporate withdrawal announcements came April 14th. 46 days. Don't go anywhere. The most explosive part is coming next. And here's what should alarm everyone, regardless of political affiliation. This isn't just about Toyota or Honda or any single corporate decision. If a major trading ally can be pushed from America's manufacturing base through tariff policy, and the administration received specific advance warning that this would happen and proceeded anyway, then the question is no longer whether trade policy can damage economic alliances. The question is whether anyone in the decision-making chain is accountable when the damage is documented, predicted, and deliberate. Once the precedent is established that allied corporate investment is expendable in pursuit of tariff leverage, future trading partners of every political orientation will build their supply chains to exclude American dependency regardless of which party holds the White House. The economic foundation of America's post-war manufacturing relationships doesn't survive that lesson being taught to 60 countries simultaneously. This puts the Trump administration in an absolutely impossible political and legal position. On one side, the administration faces a corporate withdrawal that is already legally committed, financially disclosed, and operationally irreversible on the normal timeline, meaning the jobs, the investment, and the manufacturing activity are leaving regardless of what is said in a press conference. The SEC filings cannot be undone through a tweet. On the other side, the administration confronts documented evidence, the internal NEC memo, showing that this outcome was specifically predicted, specifically warned against, and specifically overruled. Denying awareness of the consequences is foreclosed by a memo with a date, a distribution list, and a conclusion that proved precisely correct. And here's the impossible bind. If the administration claims the tariffs are working as designed and the corporate response is temporary, it directly contradicts the February 27th memo, which stated explicitly that once the financial case for American operations is formally lost, withdrawal cannot be reversed through political signaling. If the administration admits the tariffs need revision and begins a rollback, it validates every trading partner that has held firm through the pressure campaign, triggering identical concession demands from Europe, South Korea, and Taiwan simultaneously. If the administration argues that the $40 billion withdrawal is smaller than the long-term gains from domestic manufacturing reshoring, it faces the structural reality that American domestic manufacturers lack the production capacity, trained workforce, and component supply chains to absorb Japanese production volume within any politically relevant time frame. There's no defense strategy that addresses all three pieces of evidence simultaneously. Constitutional and trade law scholars are calling this the most consequential unforced economic error by an American administration since the Smoot-Hawley tariff of 1930. Dr. Jennifer Hillman, senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations and former World Trade Organization appellate judge, stated on MSNBC that the situation represents a case study in tariff escalation producing the exact outcome economists warned against: permanent structural reorientation of allied investment, not temporary pressure that produces negotiated concessions. The difference between a tariff that works and a tariff that destroys is whether the target has alternatives. Japan has alternatives. They just use them. Former United States Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, who served in the first Trump administration and designed the original Section 301 tariff strategy, told the Financial Times that while he supports the principle of trade pressure, the execution in this case crossed a threshold where the cost to American manufacturing communities exceeds any plausible benefit from the tariff revenue or negotiating leverage, because the leverage disappeared the moment the corporate disclosures were filed. Even Senator Rob Portman of Ohio, the former U.S. trade representative who represents a state with 11 Japanese-owned manufacturing facilities employing over 42,000 workers, released a statement saying, "I support strategic trade pressure. I do not support policies that were warned in writing to produce this result and proceeded anyway. Ohio families working in Honda plants did not choose this outcome." Do me a favor and slam that like button because it genuinely helps this video reach more people. So, let's break down what this means. First, immediate economic devastation across a specific geography. The 68,000 jobs directly affected by the announced withdrawals are not uniformly distributed. They are concentrated in Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Alabama, states that voted for Trump by margins of 8 to 26 points in 2024. Georgetown, Kentucky loses the Toyota plant that is its largest employer. Marysville, Ohio enters a years-long industrial contraction. Lincoln, Alabama faces the Honda facility suspension that drives its entire regional supply chain. These are not abstract economic statistics. These are the communities the tariff policy was explicitly designed to protect, experiencing the exact outcome the administration's own economists said would happen. Second, the alliance implications fundamentally alter American strategic positioning in the Pacific. Japan is the cornerstone of America's Indo-Pacific security architecture, the U.S. Japan Mutual Defense Treaty, the forward deployment of 54,000 American troops on Japanese soil, the joint intelligence sharing apparatus built over 70 years. All of this operates within a relationship defined partly by economic integration. When Japanese corporate leaders publicly state that America is no longer a reliable investment environment, that language does not stay in the business press. It reaches Beijing, Seoul, Canberra, and every other capital assessing the stability of their own American partnerships. Foreign ministers in countries currently under American tariff pressure are reading these SEC filings as a roadmap. Finally, the long-term precedent restructures how every major trading partner builds its supply chain going forward. The lesson that every corporate board in Tokyo, Seoul, Frankfurt, and Taipei is drawing from April 14th is direct and permanent. Never allow American manufacturing to be your only option. Build the Mexican plant. Build the Vietnamese facility. Keep the American operation as a secondary allocation, not a primary dependency. Once that strategic lesson becomes corporate doctrine across 40 countries simultaneously, the invitation to rebuild that dependency on American terms will take decades, not years, to extend and even longer to accept. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. I'm genuinely curious to see your perspective. But beyond the immediate economic fallout, this represents a test of whether American trade policy can function responsibly when the institutions designed to flag its consequences, the National Economic Council, the Council of Economic Advisors, the U.S. Trade Representative's Office, send documented warnings that are overruled. The system was designed to ensure that decision-makers have accurate information before consequential choices are made. That system appears to have worked precisely as intended on February 27th. The warning was issued. The analysis was correct. The decision to proceed was made anyway. The question the constitutional system now faces is not whether the warning was adequate. It clearly was. The question is what accountability looks like when documented warnings are knowingly disregarded and the predicted damage materializes on schedule. This scenario is causing absolute pandemonium within Washington's economic policy establishment. Reports indicate the National Economic Council has been in nearly continuous emergency session since the April 14th announcements. Republican senators from Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky have been holding emergency caucus calls attempting to coordinate a legislative response. Senate Finance Committee Chairman Mike Crapo faces an impossible situation. Pressure from Trump-aligned caucus members to defend the tariff strategy while manufacturing state colleagues demand immediate rollback. Democratic leadership must manage the political opportunity of a predicted outcome materializing in real time while avoiding the appearance of celebrating the economic harm to American workers. Meanwhile, the White House is in crisis mode. Senior officials have been meeting around the clock with legal and communications teams attempting to develop a response strategy that neither validates the February 27th memo as damning nor contradicts it as fabricated, given that its existence has already been confirmed by 3 separate sources to the Wall Street Journal. Early statements from the White House characterized the corporate withdrawals as a coordinated attempt by multinational companies to manipulate American trade policy and claimed the investment would return once the broader trade framework was resolved. But economic analysts immediately noted that the statements were legally inconsistent with the SEC filings, which are irrevocable commitments under American securities law. But polling conducted in the 72 hours following the April 14th announcements showed that 67% of Americans believe the administration should immediately modify the tariff schedule to prevent further corporate withdrawals, including 44% of self-identified Republicans. In Ohio and Indiana specifically, surveys show 71% of voters believe the administration failed to adequately consider the consequences for manufacturing workers. Voters in states that were central to the 2024 electoral coalition. Things escalated further when the president addressed the nation on Wednesday evening. He denied that the NEC memo reflected official policy guidance, attacked the Wall Street Journal reporters who published the story as tools of the globalist establishment, and claimed the corporate withdrawal announcements were a coordinated bluff that would be reversed within weeks when Japan realized it needed American consumers. But trade lawyers and corporate governance experts immediately noted that the president did not address the legally binding nature of the SEC filings, focusing instead on characterizations of intent that are irrelevant to the contractual commitments already made. Stay with me because what comes next will completely change your understanding of where this leads. Here's what makes the administration's position so precarious and its response so strategically disastrous. By attacking the Wall Street Journal and characterizing the corporate announcements as a bluff, the administration has created a situation where the companies involved now face reputational and legal pressure to proceed with the withdrawals on their announced schedules to prove they were not bluffing. Japanese corporate culture does not tolerate public loss of face on commitments made under formal disclosure. Toyota's Koji Sato cannot now reverse the SEC filing without his board, his shareholders, and his government viewing it as capitulation under threat, which creates exactly the governance liability he was avoiding by leaving. The administration's rhetorical attack has made the withdrawal more certain, not less. Political analyst Ian Bremmer, president of Eurasia Group, wrote in a widely shared analysis that the administration is running the exact playbook that produces permanent damage, treating a documented, irreversible, legally committed corporate action as a negotiating bluff is not strategy, it is denial, and denial buys time while the factories close. Dr. Mary Lovely, senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics, observed that the pattern here is consistent and dangerous. Tariffs imposed over documented warnings, outcomes materializing exactly as warned, response characterized by attack on the messenger rather than reassessment of the policy. That pattern does not end with recovered investment. It ends with structural decoupling. This goes far beyond one tariff dispute or one president. It's about whether the United States can maintain the economic alliances that underpin its security and manufacturing base when internal warning systems are overridden by political calculation. If an administration can receive specific documented predictions of allied corporate withdrawal, proceed with the policy anyway, and face no accountability mechanism when the predictions prove accurate, then the institutional value of those warning systems collapses. Every future administration will understand that economic forecasts are optional inputs, not binding constraints, as long as they maintain sufficient political support. That is not just economically dangerous, it is a breakdown of the decision-making architecture that has protected American economic relationships for 70 years. If this blows your mind, hit that like button right now. Here's the current situation. 14 Japanese corporations have filed legally binding SEC disclosures committing to withdraw $40.3 billion in American investment. The administration received specific advance warning in a February 27 NEC memo that this outcome would result from the tariff schedule. That memo's prediction was accurate to within 46 days. The economic impact falls disproportionately on manufacturing communities in Republican-leaning states. And the administration's response of characterizing legally binding corporate disclosures as a bluff has created incentives for the companies involved to accelerate rather than delay their withdrawal timelines. This isn't political theater or negotiating leverage. This is the most serious structural damage to America's Pacific Economic Alliance since the 1971 Nixon shock suspended dollar convertibility and blindsided Tokyo without consultation. When Japan's largest corporations make irrevocable commitments under American securities law to exit American manufacturing, when those commitments are supported by audited financial modeling and third-party analysis from Deloitte and McKinsey, when the administration's own economists warned in writing that this would happen, the alliance is being tested in ways it has never been tested since the foundations of the post-war order were constructed. Keep an extremely close eye on this story because the coming weeks will determine not just the fate of 68,000 American manufacturing jobs, but whether allied corporate investment in the United States can be rebuilt once it has been structurally committed away under securities law. Toyota has announced it will begin production realignment in May. Honda's Ohio transition schedule begins in June. Sony's American R&D facilities enter a review process concluding in July. Each milestone will generate new headlines, new community impacts, and new political pressure on manufacturing state Republicans whose constituents are directly affected. The administration faces a closing window to reverse the tariff schedule before the operational transitions become impossible to undo on any reasonable timeline. But every day the characterization of SEC filings as bluffs continues. That window narrows. Before we go any further, smash that subscribe button so you never miss content like this, because this economic crisis is unfolding in real time and represents the most serious threat to America's Pacific manufacturing relationships in modern American history. Here's where things stand right now. Japan's 14 largest corporate exporters have committed in legally binding American securities filings to withdraw $40.3 billion in American investment. The evidence driving that decision was validated, not just by corporate finance departments, but by independent analysis from some of the world's largest consulting firms. The administration's response of attacking media coverage and characterizing irrevocable legal commitments as bluffs appears to be accelerating the corporate withdrawal rather than preventing it. And every subsequent operational milestone, Toyota in May, Honda in June, Sony in July, brings the decision point closer to irreversibility. This isn't a trade dispute that ends at a negotiating table. This is a documented, predicted, legally committed restructuring of Japan's American manufacturing presence that was set in motion by a policy decision made over the explicit objections of the administration's own economists. What happens in the coming months will determine not just whether these specific jobs are saved, but whether America's reputation as a stable, predictable investment environment can be restored to the allies who built their manufacturing strategies around that assumption. The stakes have never been higher for America's post-war economic architecture. The evidence has never been more documented and more specific. And the constitutional question, whether warning systems inside the executive branch have any binding weight when political priorities override them, has never been more immediately consequential. Pause for a second and hit that like button if you're finding value in this coverage.